Hi everyone, Robert Peake here from Next Action Associates, and I just wanted to talk to you about what I've seen as one of probably the biggest traps that people new to GTD often fall into when they're trying to implement, particularly when they're trying to implement on their own without the guidance of a coach. Hopefully this can help you avoid that trap. So one of the very first things that I see with people new to GTD, people wanting to implement this methodology, they get a hold of the idea of getting things out of their head, of externalizing, of capturing everything that's on their mind, and they can get into a kind of perfectionism, but in the wrong way. By that, I mean that if you're used to creating to-do lists, and you're used to creating these kind of crude placeholders for stuff you need to think about later, you'll notice most people will only write down a handful right at a time. Here's the top 5 things I should be focused on. When you come to GTD and we say, let's get it all out of your head, if you're doing that in the same way that you've been doing to-do lists, pretty rapidly you're going to compile a huge long list of stuff that you know you should be thinking about, but every time you look at it, it just completely overwhelms you. I think the first thing is, don't panic, right? But know that probably the single biggest trap that people fall into in GTD is squishiness, is having squishy lists, is transferring that whole to-do mindset into what is now 50, 60, 70 so-called projects that are really, again, just crude placeholders for stuff you know you ought to be thinking more about. That's stressful. That's overwhelming. And what happens from here is that then now you don't want to look at that list, right? That's the guilt closet. That's the place where you've shoved a bunch of stuff that you know you should be thinking about later, where you've said things like mum, and reorg and trousers to yourself. And those are just, again, reminders that you really should be doing something about that rather than really clear actions and projects. I've been doing GTD for almost 20 years now. I've never had fewer than probably 70 projects at a time, right? It's just constant. It's just there. But it doesn't stress me out at all. New ones come in, ones get marked as done, and this is my radar screen for how I live my life. But there's a big, big difference between my project list and most people's to-do lists, and most beginning GTDers' to-do lists as well. Mine look like finish lines, one after another. And as a result of those looking like really clear outcomes, like I know what done looks like, and the next actions associated with those looking like really clear next steps, I relate to this as a kind of state of play system, rather than an I ought to, I should be, really need to think about these kind of things list. So that's the difference between a squishy list and a GTD list. And most people who think they're doing GTD are really just creating larger and larger squishy lists, which is going to stress them out more and more. Then guess what? You don't want to look at those lists. If you're not looking at your next action lists daily, that's the second level of trap, right? That's the floor you fall down into as phase 2 of this conundrum. Then the third and the worst part of this is that then you also are not going to want to be doing your weekly reviews. And as soon as that kicks in, you're really kind of off the wagon, right? You're not really doing GTD anymore. You're compiling guilt in a system that was once working for you a little bit because at least it gave you the relief of getting it out of your head. But now it's a morass. It's just a squishy mess of stuff that you don't quite feel right about anymore. So if any of that sounds familiar, if any of that rings true, you're not alone. A lot of people, particularly people that start out, with the book and with good intentions, get a ton of stuff out of their head, but they're not really clarifying the actions and the projects in the ways that we prescribe. If the way to know whether or not this is happening to you is to just take any item on your project list and look at it, or any item on your action list and look at it and say, is there anything? Do I need to rethink anything, or is this absolutely self-evident what this is? This is absolutely self-evident. And if the answer is no, that's one little item that as those items accumulate that are no longer self-evident, it's going to start causing you to no longer want to look at your lists, no longer want to do your daily review, no longer want to do your weekly review, no longer do GTD really. So the key with this is to know that any kind of rethinking is sinking. Right? Rethinking is the big problem with to-do lists, with all the systems pre-GTD that you've already tried, basically. right? So it's not mom on a list. It's, great birthday party for mom, project, next action, call sister. It's not reorg. It's, proposal for reorganization submitted to the executive committee, next action, talk to Bill about outsourcing IT. It's not trousers. It's an item on your errand list that says take trousers to the dry cleaner next time you're near the station. Those kind of things, those ways of talking to your future self make all the difference in whether or not you're going to want to engage with this stuff, or whether because it's squishy, you're going to want to start to fall away from it. So I would say, rather than just writing the enthusiasm of trying to get everything out of your head and just building these lists as quickly as you can, you step back and really take a look at, have I clarified this so much and so well that someone else could almost do this stuff for me with almost no prior knowledge? That's not the case. You're not really capturing the results of your thinking the first time. You're leaving a little bit for later. And those little bits accumulate and become this, I almost see it like this kind of squishy slime. Your system gets clogged up with residual bits of thinking that needs to happen, residual bits of guilt that you didn't think about this stuff already. And that's what causes people more than anything to fall away from GTD, to say, well, it didn't quite work for me. The reality is you were bringing old habits into a new approach, rather than really going for the heart of GTD, which is about clarifying your thinking the first time and then storing it in such a way that you don't have to rethink it. I hope that's helpful. I hope that inspires you to go and have a look at some of your lists, and really be honest with yourself about where you've been squishy, where you've been, not quite clarifying it to the level that it's absolutely self-evident later. You'll know too, because when you go to look at those lists and some of those items, you're scanning down and they go, oh, those are the items you probably haven't clarified to the degree you need to. So if you feel yourself starting to get into this trap, if you feel yourself starting to fall away from using your lists regularly, if you are in danger of not doing your weekly reviews anymore, it's time to get real about what those lists look like. Are they really next action and project lists, or are they kind of squishy to-do lists and placeholders of what you think you ought to be thinking about later? Because if you're deferring that thinking until later, you're just storing up trouble for that future self. And some part of you knows it. Some part of you's not going to want to go down, that road later on. Now's the time to do it. Now's the time to get it clear. Do that over time. Build up those kind of lists that are clear. And you're in really good territory. So wishing you productivity and success, and hoping that you can get off on the right foot with GTD and just go from there. Look forward to your thoughts. See you next time.